So, while I have enjoyed a lot covering the Russo-Ukraine war, and I will continue to do so, and it's cool to see history written in real time and to kind of follow the play-by-play, and a lot of the time it is really funny, just like with the Ukraine cinematic universe and the movie logic and the snake eating and stuff like that. At the same time, I admit it's kind of been very draining, morally, emotionally, and spiritually, and it's actually kind of made me have a bit of an existential crisis over some things. And that's the basic principle of trying to reconcile the concept of sin and moral responsibility with the fact that most people just don't have agency. And I think this has been definitively proved by the whole Ukraine thing and the Israel thing, and we'll get into that. But to take a slight digression, but relevant one, a couple years ago, a friend of mine and I were talking about 1984, and we said, this book it's good. There's a lot of interesting ideas in it. It's kind of over the top. It's kind of a comedy at parts. Like you have the scene where it goes, they're having the pro war against East Asia rally, and like halfway through the rally, the guy literally gets a call, says, "No, we're now at war with Eurasia. We're allied with East Asia," and he tells them that, and everyone immediately, like goldfish, forgets why they were there. They forget the last like half hour. They go, "Yeah, we've always been at war with Eurasia. It's the current thing now. We've always been. It's it's a conspiracy. It's the like the antisocial fringe people who were trying to brainwash us or gaslight us into thinking that we were at war with East Asia, but we've always been at war with Eurasia." And I said, that's kind of a funny kind of a take on the whole current thing and how people can be easily led, but it's kind of unreasonable. It's kind of people aren't that like prone to just if they're told something they immediately believe it. But it's true they are. I was wrong. 100% I was wrong. That is how real life works. I mean, the whole Russo Ukraine thing just happened. And the next day, everyone had Ukraine profile pics. You had just, I don't think people remember the mass outpourings of fake public grief over it. Like, people were acting like, oh, we've always cared about Ukraine. This is the biggest conflict of all time. Russia's evil. We've always thought Russia was evil. And people were crying. People were putting the flags. They were saying we have to boycott Russia as long as it takes. I'm going to rearrange my entire life and my entire way of looking at the world to revolve around this. And you just had such a hysterical devotion to this cause, and yet all the Russian stuff getting canceled. And I firmly believe if the media had told people to go out, find people of Russian heritage and kill them, a lot of people would have just done that because they were told that. And people have been invested in this thing for years now. Years, because the media tells them it's this big thing, it's this fighting for freedom, it's something you're supposed to care about. And I mean, it was bad, but then the Israel thing happened, and then immediately it just wasn't the current thing anymore. Like, I remember almost overnight when the Hamas thing happened, everyone just forgot about Ukraine. I even did a stream making fun of this, saying the Ukraine war is over, everybody can go home. But just a lot of people who for the last 2 years have cried about it, who have daily thought about this constantly, who have donated thousands of dollars to it, who have done political activism, just immediately, like goldfish, it just switches off. And then they're immediately pulled into the whole Israel Palestine thing. And I covered that one article of the guy who's like, it's kind of boring now, the whole Russo Ukraine war thing. I need something more interesting. I need something more exciting. And these are the same people who were making declarations of as long as it takes. This is the battle for global freedom. There's a genocide going on. There's like a Holocaust going on in Ukraine, and we have to stop Russia. And they've been saying all this stuff for like 2 years now. And then immediately something else happens. It's like the scene squirrel. And then all of that was just fake. All of that just evaporates like smoke. And none of it took. But like you could have gotten these people to go and kill Russians just because like they were just that wrapped up in it, And it ultimately meant so little to them fundamentally that if the media just talked about something else, they would immediately forget about it. And I was just thinking to myself, how can I reconcile the concept of mortal sin, and kind of hell and damnation and stuff like that, to the fact that most people just don't have any agency? They will literally just do whatever they're told. And logic will not work, evidence will not work, moral reasoning will not work. And I know, like in a lot of cases, and I think abortion is a good example of this, a lot of people who are pro abortion, you cannot, regardless of the circumstance, it doesn't matter what evidence you present to them, it doesn't matter what moral reasoning you make, they will just scream at you and say that it's a good thing and that you're a hater. They won't even attempt to intellectually engage with you. They won't attempt to offer any kind of counter argument. They will just scream at you and they will get hysterical. This is something I found my entire life, and I found this even when I was young, is that to the vast majority of people, stuff like evidence doesn't matter. Even if it's like evidence from within a source they trust. Like they could be referencing, I don't know, a story from CNN, the headline, and you'll say, well, if you read in the article, it actually says this or explains this. And when you talk to them, you can just see the light leave their eyes, them completely blank out. They don't know how to respond to that because that would require an evaluation of evidence or like a weighing. And then they will just immediately go back and just repeat whatever the title was or whatever like slogan they have been taught. Like you can't make moral arguments, you can't make evidential arguments, you can't engage with a lot of people. They will just literally do whatever you tell them to do. I mean, the example is always the Rwandan genocide, where they just told everybody to go out and machete other people, and they did. It's just, and I once again, I think with the whole like Russo-Ukraine thing, if they had have told people, go kill everybody with Russian heritage, a lot of people probably would have just gone and done that because in that moment they were completely and totally spiritually, emotionally, and personally dedicated to something that they will immediately abandon and will never think about again the second it stops being the current thing. And can you really hold these people morally accountable for anything? If they lived in a just society, if they lived in a society that told them to do the right thing, they would just immediately do it. But if they live in a society that tells them to do the wrong thing, then they just will immediately do that as well. And it's if there's no like active choice or active decision involved, if there's no real ability to choose good and evil, how can you really make any kind of judgment? um, how can you say like this person has committed a mortal sin and deserves to go to hell when the person basically just isn't even really capable of it? Like you can't explain it to them. They just saw like something on CNN or something that says that it's okay. There will also be no internal consistency. You can try to point that out, and it just this is something that conservatives have a problem with, and this is something I have a problem with, and it's the same friend actually I had that conversation with about 1984 keeps saying this to me. He goes, Argent, you're naive and you just don't get it because you try to look for reason in these things. You try to look for reason. You try to look for a causal chain. You try to look at what the basis of these things are. In a lot of cases, there just isn't one. And in your insistence on trying to create some sort of order out of this is is one of the main things that makes you depressed and makes you unhappy in your life. And it is true. It's very hard for me. And I don't want to make this, and one of the reasons I have trouble talking about this is I don't want it to make it sound like I'm Mr. Big Brained, I'm a paragon of moral virtue, I'm holy, I'm pious. I'm none of those things, and I've never really pretended to be that. What I am though is if somebody says something and they have a good point, I'll at least sit down and consider it. I'll at least go, well, is that the case? And then sometimes they'll say, okay, they have a point, but this is more important, or something else, but I will change my mind. And I'm sure you've seen me change my opinion on stuff lots of times over it. But for most people, it's just that does not work. You just can't get them to even consider that, to even ask themselves like a basic question of, is what I'm doing right or wrong? What is the morality of this? Is this good for society? Is this bad for society? It's not necessarily even that they act on it, but I just don't think that the ability to think in those terms is even there. And it's how do you hold these people accountable for anything? Like in a metaphysical sense. And I'm not doubting God. I'm just saying on a existential level, I just find it very hard to kind of deal with because like once again, like 200 or even 100 years ago, the idea of completely rewriting history and pretending that like Northern Europe was full of black people in the medieval era is just something no one would even think of doing. Like, people would say that's ridiculous. No one would ever believe that. But they start doing it and people immediately believe it. Like, it takes 2 seconds. Another, I think, probably the best example of this is gay marriage. 200 years ago, no one would have supported it. Not even liberals would have supported it. They didn't believe in it at all. And the second that the media says it's okay, or Will and Grace airs, or it becomes legal, and you'll see this in countries where they will consistently vote against it, but then the Supreme Court or whoever will force it through on the population. And within a couple of years, everyone will basically change their opinion. It'll go from like 80% opposed to 80% support in an extremely short period of time because it's socially acceptable, because it's the current thing, because they saw a sitcom. And that's part of like why I do the Ukraine cinematic universe is that the most people that is literally how they view the world is that it's a movie like this is something a lot of I'm sorry this kind of train of consciousness that a lot of like dissident right people have said is that liberals base everything that they believe off of things they've seen on TV. Like the best example of this is why don't they just shoot the gun? Why don't the police just shoot the gun out of the guy's hand? I saw that in some like cop show, and they just think that that's the way reality works. And you can't explain to them otherwise. You can't explain how pistols work. You can't explain how like those situations work. It is impossible. I know like the other one is why don't they shoot out the tires on the cars that are like driving away or stuff like that and they just think that that is how it works. It's an action movie. It operates under action movie logic. And how can you really hold someone who has such a twisted way of looking at the world accountable for anything that they've done? Because you can just tell them that. If the media said tomorrow, like if the media just en masse said abortion's bad, it kills children, then people who would have like supported someone being sent to a gulag, who would have supported someone maybe even being executed for being pro life, would immediately change their mind. They'd become 100% pro life overnight. That whole thing would be forgotten. All their principled moral stands, all the things that they've done over the years. And I don't think they would have any guilt about it, even if, let's say, they had killed someone who was pro life in defense of abortion rights. Then I don't think they would really feel guilty about it. They just say, well, at the time, that was the current thing. And the whole current thing is funny and all, but it's very disturbing. I think on a very basic level because you look around at like the people around you and you realize that most of them will kill you. They will kill you. They'll steal from you. They'll leave you by the side of the road in a ditch. If that becomes the current thing, if the media tells them that, if the government tells them that, if an NGO tells them that, and it really has kind of made me understand because I know like whenever you have these colored revolutions or you'll have conservative or just different societies overnight basically change and it's like how can all that go away in a second, those centuries of tradition, that centuries of cultural capital? It does. It does. You just come in with like some slick music video And people will abandon thousands of years of their culture and history just overnight, basically. And so it has kind of led me to have a bit of an existential crisis. Once again, how can people go to hell if that is the way that they are set up? Um, that they can't even feel bad. Like, keep in mind, I'm a Christian. I'm Christian. People are deeply flawed. I accept that. I've always accepted that. People have all kinds of problems. Life is really hard. And there's a lot of things about it that make you do things you shouldn't do. And I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of eating too much, of being jealous of people, of lustful thoughts, of all that kind of stuff. And I get that. And I think that's something that we're all cursed to struggle with. We all have our crosses to bear. And I have immense sympathy. And I'm sure people have noticed over the years, I have a lot of sympathy to people who struggle with those things. But I just don't know if people even really have the capacity to struggle with it. Or if it's just they're told something's okay by man in authority or by pop culture, it's okay. And it's like literally it's the whole thing. Like, the other disturbing thing is just like, I'm sorry if I'm jumping all over the place, but part of why I do the whole Ukraine cinematic universe thing is people think Marvel movies are reality. Like, they do literally see the Ukraine conflict as a movie, and they are acting towards it as if it's a movie, and they do believe it operates on movie logic, that the plucky heroes are just going to somehow win in the end, and nothing else really matters within the context of it. And once again, you had this, everyone just forgot about it, and they just said, okay, well, we're going to talk about Israel now, and now that's not necessarily going to be the current thing for much longer. And some people have given them permission that you can criticize Israel, and it's not anti-Semitic to do that, but some people still think it is. Narrative will just be like, people just don't have any resistance to the narrative, and it doesn't matter if they're a conservative NPC, they're a Christian NPC, they're a liberal NPC, they're an atheist NPC. And it bothers me because one of the things that when I was younger, I think did actually make me a much worse person was, depressed as I was and as suicidal as I was very prideful. I thought that I was superior to most people. I thought I was smarter than most people. And a lot of people in these circles, they call them gamma males, that kind of thing, see themselves as being like the natural aristocracy, the aristocrats of the soul, the philosopher kings, the people who should rule over society. And I've really tried to fight that within myself, and to try to be humble and that kind of thing. You just see this, and then it just makes me wonder, like, no, maybe that is the case. And it's just, you're the only man, the only sane man. You're alone in the world. You're uniquely kind of responsible, and you have to just kind of watch this horror develop around you. So there's always the question of like, and maybe I'll just end off on this: are people good or people evil? I think maybe 20% of people are good. They're born with natural empathy, they're born with a natural sense of right and wrong, a sense of reason, that regardless of the setting, they will tend to be at the better end of it. Then you have maybe 10 to 20% of people who are just evil. They're sadists. They enjoy taking from other people. They enjoy other people's suffering. And they're just inherently were born that way. But then the 60% will just literally do whatever they're told. They don't have any ability to kind of choose between the two. They just kind of have to have a society that tells them it. And I just kind of, it's hard. It's hard to kind of reconcile all of these things together. But hopefully this was kind of interesting, even if it was a little bit incoherent. But it's a tricky subject. I just kind of wanted to get my thoughts out there, because covering this stuff does kind of is draining sometimes. It is kind of difficult. Anyways, God bless everybody. We'll talk to you again real soon.